From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. K-State's Romulo Lollato will discuss adjustments that you wheat producers might consider when planting into dry soils, giving due thought to the emergence characteristics of individual wheat varieties and the planting depth that will get that seed to moisture. He'll be followed by K-State's Victor Gomez-Leon. He'll talk about his ongoing survey of dairy producers here in Kansas on the production challenges they're encountering and their need for information to respond to those challenges. Further ahead, this week's horticulture segment where K-State's Ward Upham will go over the steps to successfully planting spring flowering bulbs here in the fall. All that and more next on Agriculture Today. This is our Thursday edition of Agriculture Today. As always, thanks for tuning in. Well, we are upon wheat planting time in Kansas. But given our current conditions, some added decisions may be in order. We'll talk about those now. With Romulo Lollato joining us, wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Romulo, we're dry, so that may prompt a few questions out there.
Most definitely, Eric. I think that right now we're really concerned with the establishment of the crop, right? And I like to say that if you get a good crop establishment now, perhaps, we're halfway done, right? Because there's still too many things that can go on, of course, during the growing season. But really getting that crop establishment is extremely important, especially if we go in regions where these droughts during the fall are reoccurring, like the southwest part of the state. Many times folks plant the crop now and it doesn't really emerge until sometime in January or something along those lines. Even though we're still in the very beginning of the planting season window, so that's not as concerning as it would be if we were reaching the end and we haven't had any rain yet and no rain in the forecast, right? So important to remember that we're still in the early side of planting date across the entire state. So we still have time to make our adjustments and still get a good crop establishment, hopefully.
At this point, then, you would suggest that producers not make any radical decisions as far as changing their planting intentions or their management in any way?
Well, at this point in time, I think that in terms of management, right, we would be considering planting depth, right? So how deep should we put that seed into the ground? And we have a couple of different situations, right? Some parts of Kansas got some rainfall on the week before, right, last week. And so in those parts of the state, growers might be able to reach moisture, perhaps a little bit deeper than what we usually plant the crop. We're usually shooting to 1 inch, perhaps, of seeding depth as the optimal there. Maybe they need to go 1.5 inches, a little bit more to reach moisture. So in that case, if there's no rain on the forecast, I would probably try and reach the moisture, right? Because the concern of going too deep is that, well, we go too deep and then we have a torrential rain, then it becomes even deeper, just the ridges that come down and so on. So if there was rain on the forecast, my decision would be to plant shallower, just plant at the normal depth, even though it will be dusting it in and just leaving the seed there. At least with the rain on the forecast, we'll still normally get the crop establishment. But with no rain on the forecast, if the moisture is still within 1.5 inches from the surface, which was about the situation in Hutchinson yesterday as we were planting our own trials there, that's the decision that we took. It was like, well, let's try to reach that moisture, put the seed into good moisture conditions. Most of the varieties that we have, the shortest coleoptile is going to be about 2 inches or so. So I probably wouldn't go too much deeper than that unless you know that you're planting a long coleoptile variety. Then you have a little bit more room to work with. But if you're reaching moisture at about 1.5 inches, for the most part, I think we should be in good shape.
Is there any need for adjusting seeding rates whatsoever at this point, though?
At this point, I probably wouldn't adjust my seeding rate yet. Again, we're in the beginning of the planting season, right? If we plant this crop this week and we're dusting it in and we don't have good rainfall in the next 5 days or so, maybe there's still a chance that in a couple of weeks we still get a good rainfall. So at this point in time, I wouldn't change the seeding rate from where you're shooting anyways, unless, of course, you're shooting for a very low seeding rate, right? Then I would already kind of bump it up. But if you're shooting for the recommended seeding rate for the region where you are farming, I would probably maintain the seeding rate at this point, plant some of the fields. If we see that, well, it's really dry and the forecast is not improving, then perhaps wait a little bit more and take the decision later on about the area, the final area of the crop.
Want to put out another prospect there, though, and that is if one is planting largely for forage, for grazing purposes, how long can they wait to plant, wait for moisture before that becomes somewhat of a dicey proposition here?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, Eric, because during this time of the year, that September time frame, every week that we are delaying the emergence of the crop, we're losing a potential of up to about 800 or 1,000 pounds of forage of dry matter in the fall, right? So that's a very steep loss in forage potential that we have just by delaying planting date in the fall. So at this point in time, if the grower hasn't planted yet, and again, when we plant for forage, we're looking for higher seeding rate and earlier planting date as well. I would still maintain that higher seeding rate if that's still the goal. But again, for every week that we delay our planting date during this time of September through early October here, we're losing about 800 to 1,000 pounds of forage, of dry matter yield potential during the fall. So it's a pretty steep loss. If you're looking for forage, perhaps planting earlier would have been ideal, even though it has been dry. So it has been a tough year in that aspect.
One has to do the best they can is really what this comes down to at this point.
Yeah, so right now we need to understand what's the situation that we're establishing the crop at. Is there any moisture within reach so that we can actually get a crop established now? Or are we actually just going to dust it in and wait for rain? If that's the option, if we don't have moisture within reach, dusting it in and waiting for rain many times is still a really good option. Chances are that sometime in October here, late September, early October, we will get some rain and that crop will get established. Now, worst case scenario, this rain doesn't happen, and then we're looking into a November time frame, right? Or even later than that. Then again, we're losing yield potential for every week that we're delaying as well. We're not only losing the forage potential now in September, but the later we get into October and into November, we're losing yield potential of the crop just due to that delay. So for later plantings, then of course we would recommend bumping up those seeding rates, right? At this point in time, I said right now I'm not concerned with that yet, again, because we're at the very beginning of the optimum window for wheat planting. But if we're starting to get into October 5th, October 10th, or later, especially Northwest Kansas, then I'll definitely be looking into bumping up those seeding rates. And again, a crop that is emerged later in January, perhaps, or even February, it has a much reduced yield potential, but we have seen some really good yields from fields that emerged that late. And I think that a very good example is this very last year, the 2021 harvest, where many fields that got planted in October never really emerged until November, sometimes even into December. But we had such a nice spring with good moisture and low temperatures for the most part up to until June 1st, that the crop still yielded really well, even in those conditions where it didn't emerge in the fall. But again, that it becomes much more dependent on the weather under those conditions.
Are there any other management considerations that a producer might want to at least keep in their back pocket for now, and anticipating that perhaps this dryness will stick with us for a few weeks, things that they might want to have as a contingency plan that they might want to enact when the time to plant must occur?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? How do we plan for these conditions? And from a management perspective, again, if we see that the forecast for rains, they don't improve, and we're getting later and later into the planting window and almost kind of leaving that optimal of the planting window, increasing seeding rates will definitely be one thing to be considered. Some in-furrow fertilizer could also help in some of that early establishment as well. But right now, at this point in time that we're looking at the last week of September here for us to do any management practice at this point, I think that it's important to take a look at that coleoptile land from those varieties, because soils are relatively hot for folks who are going to try and reach for moisture, it's important to remember that those warm soils, they will reduce the coleoptile length of most varieties. Now, varieties, they respond differently to that coleoptile length reduction due to hot soils. So that's something to consider now. If I'm trying to reach for moisture at this point in time, I would not plant a short coleoptile variety. I would stick to varieties with a longer coleoptile so that we are able to get a good stand emergence. Remember that if we plant a short coleoptile and that coleoptile stops elongating before it reaches the soil surface, the first true leaf, which emerges from that coleoptile, it will emerge still underground, and it will cause what we see as that kind of accordion shape, yellow leaf, simply because the leaf itself cannot poke through the soil surface. The coleoptile can. So at this point in time, if I have a few different varieties that I chose to my operation, I would definitely plant the longer coleoptile one first, mostly to ensure that those hot soils are not going to be a concern in establishing the crop.
Well, it's not a fully ideal start to the wheat planting season. We'd like more moisture available, of course. That's not in the cards at the moment, but producers need to think about contingencies here. In fact, we'll be discussing in-furrow fertilization with your colleague, Dorvar Ruiz-Diaz, on tomorrow's program. So we'll touch upon that then. And Romulo, we will be keeping tabs on what's going on, as you will, with our wheat planting here in Kansas in the weeks ahead. Thanks for the comments right here, and we will touch base again quite soon.
Thank you, Eric.
Wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato, K-State Research and Extension, with those remarks on this part of agriculture today. And we'll return here on the K-State Radio Network. Agriculture Today returns now, and it's a pleasure to introduce to you one of the newer faculty members in the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State, and he is, in an extension capacity, going to be serving the dairy industry here in the state. Along with us now is Victor Gomez-Leon, and Victor, welcome. Our first chance to visit, so it's good to have you here.
Thank you, Eric.
You come to the U.S. from Colombia some time back, studied here in the U.S. prior to your K-State assignment, right?
Correct. So I'm originally from Colombia, but then I had the opportunity to move to Brazil, down in South America, to do a master and a PhD in veterinary science. And during my PhD, I had the great opportunity to go to University of Wisconsin in Madison. So I did all my PhD experiments at Wisconsin, and then I did 2 more years as a postdoctoral trainee back in Wisconsin, working with repro physiology.
And then earlier this year, you were invited to come to K-State and specialize in dairy reproduction, by and large?
Correct. Early this year, I was invited to join K-State as an assistant professor, dairy extension specialist. And what I proposed was to use my repro background for the dairy industry. And of course, we have other dairy specialists at the Animal Science and Industry Department, so it will match very well with their background in nutrition and dairy management.
What do you see as the areas of particular emphasis or even the challenges in dairy repro right now as you will be working with producers on their problems, their issues, or their questions?
Yes, so it happens that reproduction was seen as a problem a few years ago. Well, right now it has becoming better for some farms, but we still have a lot of different situations and scenarios. So we still have some producers that they need to work on repro. They have some that they are doing better, but they may not be taking advantage of individual animals. They are taking advantage of the full herd. And so I believe there are still opportunities where we could find a sweet spot for each of these producers and their scenarios to improve repro and to gain some more profitability in those farms.
Are there advances, technologically speaking, in this area that are worth keeping an eye on here?
Yes, definitely. One that has a lot of people have been interested and it's been discussed a lot, may be full beef embryos for the dairy industry. So as the industry develops and repro techniques improve and get better costs, we probably may see more and more of these beef embryos in the dairy industry competing into the crossbred area or the beef semen that most people are using today.
That is described as beef on dairy, and it serves a couple of important purposes for both cattle sectors, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah, it has gained a big scenario, a big part of the dairy and the beef industry. As you mentioned, it serves both of the industries because now dairy producers can sell a product that they were not getting any profitability from, and the beef industry is taking advantage of a better quality product.
Right. That's interesting to see that develop and what emerges from that as we go along here. What are some of the initial activities you have taken on? And we want to dwell on one in specific here, but talk about that if you would.
So, Eric, I'm going to step back a little bit, and I will start by saying my appointment at K-State is 70% extension, 30% research. But what I proposed was to integrate the research into the extension. So with that, we are planning to do several repro-apply experiments and maybe integrating nutrition with reproduction, because we know reproduction is the sum of everything that happens in our herds. So we will also integrate health, nutrition, and other areas. So one of the initial activities that I proposed was to conducting a dairy producer needs survey. There are two purposes for that survey. One is to identify strengths and areas that we can work together. I can serve to the dairy industry and I can, develop my program in those areas. But the second one is really to get me in contact and networking with the dairy producers, because I propose to conduct this survey on farms. So I'm visiting the producers, each of them on their farms, and we are generating a lot of discussions and getting interesting data.
The questions you're asking here then, are they far-flung? Are they covering a great number of things, repro and otherwise? What?
Yeah, so it's mainly three areas. One will be general management, then we get into reproduction, and lastly we get into educational programs to see how can I maybe develop some programs or some courses, workshops, things like that we can work maybe with producers, technicians, serving the dairy industry.
As you mentioned, this is in person on dairy farm. You are meeting one-on-one with producers out there. You've already started doing this, correct?
Correct. I have already started. I have already collected some responses to the survey. And it's interesting because sometimes in these visits, the producers have so much to share that the survey becomes a secondary thing. But it's good because it generates a follow-up visit and then more visit after that, depending on what we see in the farms. So that's what I'm looking for by going to the farms.
Well, you're not done with this yet by any means, but you have conducted these visits to some extent. What are some of the things on producers' minds as they're expressing those to you?
It's interesting, and as you may be thinking, prices are always coming, but there are very interesting things to see, like it's a worriness today how the consolidation of these farms in the industry. And, of course, that may be related also with the prices of feed and milk and all other things. But they are also very open. They are very progressive. The very last question to the survey is what is on their mind at that moment, what is their preoccupation, and if they will collaborate with K-State to do some research or respond any questions that they have. So, yeah, it may be soon still to say what will be the main problems, but I can tell you that they are very interested in technology, they are very interested on repro programs, and they are very interested on probably management of employees.
the dairy sector in Kansas seems to be hitting a stride, and with new processing plants going up, the opportunities for this industry seem to be blooming as well. How do you envision the future of dairy in Kansas, Victor?
Well, it's a very exciting time to be working as an extension specialist for dairy in Kansas. Dairy has got a lot of attention here in Kansas. You well know that it's a growing industry. It may not be growing as fast as others wanted, but it's still growing in an industry that national-wise is decreasing. So, yeah, some people may predict that we will see more concentration of animals in fewer number of farms in the whole United States. That may happen, but there may be other interesting opportunities for smaller producers, maybe to get together and work on some prices or get some advantages comparing to that if they were working on their own. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely very exciting. I have heard that we are going to increase about 50,000 cows for the next couple of years here in Kansas. So you can see how movements are being done right now. People are looking to Kansas to move their farm from other states. People here are thinking to expand their own farms, and we will see some of these farms also changing the way they are working on. So maybe some producers were having like those open dry lots. Some of them are already building these cross ventilation barns, and so that changes how we manage the dairies. So that will be very interesting to see and to work, because that's also something I have been contrasting coming from Wisconsin to Kansas. It's a completely different world.
It's a growth industry within the scope of agriculture in this state. We're looking forward to working with you as part of the Extension Dairy team here at Kansas State University now, Victor, and we will have a visit not long from now, surely, about some of the other things you're finding out through your survey.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to take advantage and send a message to the producers. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to work for serving you and build or develop a program that we can all take advantage of, grow our dairy industry together.
He is Victor Gomez Leon, and he is an extension dairy specialist here at Kansas State University. Once more, his specialty is in reproduction, but he will be teaming up with the other like specialists here at K-State to put together a comprehensive informational program in support of the expanding dairy industry here in Kansas. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Now today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you, courtesy in part of DTN. The confirmation of African swine fever in Haiti came as no surprise. According to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, he told state agriculture regulators yesterday that the USDA is doing all it can to prevent the spread of that virus to the U.S. mainland. The World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE, confirmed an outbreak of ASF in Haiti on Monday in the very southernmost city of the country that's bordering the Dominican Republic. That OIE report the first indication the virus may have spread from the Dominican. The secretary said it was important to reassure U.S. trading partners that the current outbreak in the Caribbean is regional, that if a problem occurs in one part of a region that impacts and affects a ban on the entire region, it should not affect other areas of that region. He said they're trying to convey that in terms of banning or limiting exports, that should be confined to the area that is most directly affected, in his words. Now, Vilsack said the establishment of a protection zone in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands is important because it can reassure our trading partners that at this point in time, the U.S. is doing everything it possibly can to ensure the virus doesn't enter the U.S. mainland. In the near term, Vilsack said he expects to see an effort to invest in additional resources through the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to, as he put it, harden our system here in the U.S. In the Dominican and in Haiti in particular, he says the U.S. will need to provide technical and financial assistance to help eradicate the virus. He said the USDA is working as well on developing a vaccine, saying that they've had some pretty good news recently in terms of the possibility of a vaccine that might work at least against the Asian variety of African swine fever. And he said that the USDA is wanting to continue to accelerate that research. Meantime, the Agriculture Secretary is among those continuing efforts to alleviate congestion at our nation's ports, causing shipment disruptions, including those of agricultural goods. More on that angle from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Continued disruptions at our nation's ports, some related to supply chain disruptions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, others related to natural disasters such as recent tropical storm and hurricane activity. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack Wednesday, speaking before the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, noted a same-day conversation.
With the special envoy that President Biden has set up to examine the circumstance and situation at the ports.
John Picari serving that role as part of the administration's Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force, which Secretary Vilsack is also a co-chair. The Secretary says regardless of the cause, port disruptions, particularly of ag goods being transported to export markets, is contributing to less supply available and in some cases higher prices for consumers.
We want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to keep those ports moving product as quickly as we can.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also on the trade front, the country of Taiwan has filed to join that Trans-Pacific Trade Group this days after China formally submitted its application, potentially compounding an already awkward position for the PAC's 11 members. Taiwan has notified all members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, known as the TPP, of its formal application to join that group and sought their support. Beijing said last week it wanted to join the trade pact. The TPP officially came into effect at the end of 2018 with Japan as the largest economy in it. President Biden has said that pact needs to be renegotiated before the U.S. would consider joining. Some members, including Japan, have questioned China's qualifications, including its protection of intellectual property like trademarks and subsidies. And trade experts also say China would have a tough time meeting the TPP's standards on environmental protection and workers' rights. While Taiwan, with a more market-oriented economy, may have a better cause and case to join the TPP, it's unlikely that a decision will come soon. Any single country could prolong or effectively block either or both of China's and Taiwan's applications. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, this week's Kansas Soybean Update, and waiting with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Sherry Seifert, education consultant with Kansas Soybeans, joins us. And Sherry, the Kansas State Fair was just completed, but that also means you've got the results of the soy foods judging that took place during the Kansas State Fair. What were some of the results?
Oh, we had all kinds of good stuff this year. In fact, we had more dishes than we'd had for quite a while, which was really good. We had lasagna type things. We had different spaghetti dishes for our main encore and all kinds of snacks, which is really good, trail mix things. We had a challenge there. We had a bunch of those. But the ones that really stood out was a complete dish that, just a salad with would work well. And we have all those recipes at the office, and it was all very, very good because they're really bringing their A game on.
Yeah, and it just shows the versatility and the types of dishes you had. That really shows the versatility of soy.
Yes, we are getting it out there, and there's just so many things that you can do. And we have people that we're eating different today, and there are good protein choices out there for people to choose from. And now getting the word out to where they can get it and how they can use it.
For that lasagna dish, you had mentioned there was no meat in it. They had the use of tofu in that lasagna?
There was tofu in there, yes. You can use tofu in so many things and not have one clue that it's in there. And you've added all this protein to that dish, and it picks up the flavor that you're using.
And not only are we talking about quantity and quality of dishes, but also the health benefits of all those dishes you tasted, too.
They're very healthy foods. With the work I do with the Soybean Commission, I have really had these people looking at me and say, oh, that can't be. But they try it and they say, oh, you're right. So that is a big awe for me to see the people that they're willing to admit, oh, gosh, it does happen, you know.
And if they want copies of the recipes of some of the top dishes there, they can call the soybean office to get those?
Yes, we got all of those, and we took some pictures as well, and Charlene Patton will have a hold of those as well. We share with her. It's going to get spread out there, and there's just dishes we didn't have recipes for.
And you can get that by calling 877-KS-SOYBEAN, or you can go to their website to get more information as well at kansassoybeans.org. Sherry, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks.
That is Sherry Seifert, education consultant with Kansas Soybeans, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there. Thanks, Greg. You're tuned to Agriculture Today, and coming your way next, this week's horticulture segment after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome back, and for you now, this week's horticulture segment, and it's a seasonal topic to be sure. Procedure for going about planting those spring flowering bulbs in your home landscape. With us once more, horticulturist Ward Upham of K-State Research and Extension. Well, the weather has seemingly turned to autumn-like now, so this is the ideal time to plant those bulbs, right, Ward?
That's right. So you're looking at late September through October as being the prime time to actually plant. Even if you're not going to plant until later in October, now is the time to pick out those bulbs so you have a better selection. You don't want to wait too late where you're just getting all the bulbs that have already been picked over. There's a couple of reasons we plant them at this time of year. One is you want those roots to develop through the fall and then through the winter. And the second thing is these bulbs have a chilling requirement. They have to go through a winter before they're going to bloom. And so we need to get them in now, not in the spring.
And what we're talking about here, if somebody has any doubt, such as tulips and daffodils, crocus, and the like, right?
That's right. These are not those tender bulbs such as gladiolus and cannas. Those are a different deal.
All right. Where to plant those bulbs, siting them in the landscape. Any advice here?
Yeah, so normally what we want is a place that has full sun to partial shade. And so a lot of people really like that partial shade for these. They have a nice background usually then, and it sets them off.
But they have to have some measure of sun exposure here. Full shade will not work out so well.
That's right. If you're only going to keep them for 1 year, it really doesn't matter. Just because they're not going to have to build up energy for the next year. But if you're going to keep them more than 1 year, yeah, they need some sunlight.
Well, then, these spring flowering bulbs, what growing medium do they prefer? Thinking about the soil type and the characteristics of that soil.
Yeah, so really what they prefer is a sandy loam, but very few people have that. Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking at is adding organic material to your existing soil, such as, compost, peat moss, aged bark, any of that stuff will work. A heavy clay soil can be amended by mixing in 1/3 to maybe 1/2 organic matter. And then also check the pH. That soil pH should be between 6 and 7. That's perfect for these plants.
Be somewhat particular about that, and that'll help your bulbs grow even more prolifically. What about readying the soil for planting, though? Anything special that needs to happen here?
Yeah, so you need to actually work that soil up. You need good aeration. In other words, those roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. And so we want to work that soil deeply. If you can go 12 inches deep, that would be best. And so if you're adding your organic matter, that's going to be 8 inches of soil and 4 inches of organic matter, all mixed together. Now, while you're doing that, you need to also think about fertilization. Those bulbs need to be fertilized. So about 3 pounds of a complete fertilizer, such as a 5-10-5 per 100 square feet, would be about right. Or fertilize according to soil test, but it's going to be right around there. It gives you plenty of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and those are what those bulbs need in order to grow well. So when you make that soil, mix the fertilizer and the organic matter in at the same time. You don't have to do one and then follow with the other. They can be mixed in at the same time.
And you want to allow for good water infiltration and the like. So all of that is important.
That's important.
How deep to plant those bulbs is another prime question that folks bring up. And considering they'll be overwintering, does one have to be particular here?
You want to plant maybe 2 to 3 times as deep as the bulbs are wide. And so, for example, tulips and hyacinths, that's going to come out to about 6 inches deep. Daffodils, 6 to 8 inches deep. Smaller bulbs, again, 2 to 3 times as they are wide. That planting depth is going to be from the bottom of the bulb to the top of the soil. And so that gives you an idea of how deep you're going to have to work the soil depending on how big your bulbs are. Now, as far as spacing is concerned, large bulbs are normally spaced 4 to 6 inches apart, small bulbs 1 to 2 inches. And so that gives you a nice display, but they're not crowded.
And as far as arranging those bulbs, again, is that up to one's preference, or are there any recommendations along that line?
What we want to do is plant in clumps or irregular masses. Don't line them all up. If you line them all up, it's not going to look natural, and it doesn't really make a good display. So what a lot of people do is just throw them out there, and you have to do a little bit of rearranging, fine, but do not line them up.
Yeah, and if you clump them, you can come up with a more vivid color display.
Yes, you can. You can. It makes a much better display that way.
Once you have situated those bulbs, you've planted them, what's the next measure of care here?
So now you're going to add that soil back in. So you've got the bulbs placed at the depth you want them. Then add maybe half the soil and then water in. You want to make sure you got good contact between the soil, that moist soil, and the bulb. So once you got that done, then add the other half of the soil and water again. You want those bulbs to be in moist soil. You don't want them waterlogged, but you want them in moist soil, and that way they have the moisture they need and they have the oxygen they need. And so that will get them well established.
And does one have to stay on top of those moisture needs for a while heading into the winter then?
It's best if you keep that soil moist. So a normal winter where it stays cold, you don't have to worry about it much. If you have a long extended warm spell where we get really dry weather, then yeah, you may have to go out there and make sure that they have the moisture they need.
And what will happen from there? Largely, do those bulbs sit dormant until spring? What?
Yeah, they're doing something, but you're not seeing it. And so they're putting out those roots. So don't expect, if you haven't grown bulbs like this before, don't expect to see a lot of growth. You're not going to see anything in the fall. During the winter, you may see a little bit of growth, and people get concerned when they see that because they're afraid it's going to damage the bulb. Those bulbs are really cold hardy. It's not going to hurt them. Even if they get nipped a little bit, it's not going to hurt the bulb. So if you see, for example, bulb foliage in December, don't worry about it. They're fine.
And if one doesn't get around to this right away and comes to the notion that maybe they're too late to plant spring flowering bulbs, what would you recommend?
Regardless of when you find them. I've had people call in the summer and say, should I wait until fall? You plant them when you find them. Mm-hmm. And so these are living organisms. If you wait too long, they don't have enough energy. And so they need to get in the ground and get those roots out and start taking up the nutrients they need.
They're always a neat surprise in the home landscape when they emerge after being planted the previous fall. Spring flowering bulbs, and those can lend quite a colorful touch to your home landscape. You can learn more about spring flowering bulbs through your local garden center. There's information on the K-State Horticulture website, likewise, to that effect. Ward, thank you for coming over.
You bet.
He is horticulturist Ward Upham, K-State Research and Extension. On this week's Horticulture segment, that closes out today's edition. Be sure to remind to check out our podcast service at agtoday.net. Again, that's agtoday.net. In the meantime, we'll return here this same time tomorrow. Hope you'll be with us once again then. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.